band is Deicide. The music is death metal. Across the world, millions of teenagers are listening to bands playing this extreme form of heavy metal. Music that deals with violence, murder, and Satanism. Take this song.
Kill the Christians!
On the face of it, Kill the Christians sounds like an incitement to murder. And critics believe that some kids can't separate the fantasy from the facts when listening to songs about torture and satanic sacrifice.
The music that we were raised with was the Beach Boys. And when we find out that we're talking about death metal music, we didn't know anything about it. We knew that it was bad and that Elise lost her life because of that kind of music.
Since 1995, a string of murders from California to Italy has been blamed on the influence of death metal. Some people say that it's music that can kill. Deicide are one of the most controversial of all death metal bands. Formed in Florida more than 15 years ago, the band spread their violent satanic message all over the world. And fans of Deicide have been linked to several murders. In one Oregon incident, teens were convicted of murdering a shop assistant and maiming another. Deicide band leader Glenn Benton says it's not his group's fault.
These kids, I guess, were all high and were listening to us. And, you know, about a year later, whatever, I get slapped with a lawsuit for $10 million. The parents and, the family members of these people that were hurt, were looking for a scapegoat, looking for somebody to blame. And, and yeah, I'm an easy target.
The lawsuit was settled, but the controversies have not gone away. Last year in South America, a Deicide fan was charged with brutally murdering a priest during Mass. Once again, the band was blamed. Glenn Benton claims to be a Satanist and has an upside-down cross branded into his forehead. But the band insists that they do not incite fans to commit evil acts.
So when some kid goes or person goes and murders someone or rapes somebody or whatever and blames it on the bands, that has nothing whatsoever to do with the music.
But now, death metal music is facing another, even more disturbing controversy. In July 2005 in northern Italy, the trial began of 5 young people accused of a series of brutal, ritualistic murders. They were all fans of death metal and alleged to be members of a satanic sect.
Since the very first moment, we understood this was the most ferocious crime in the last 50 years in Italy. No apparent motive. We don't know how and why. We don't know why. The presence of Satan.
The father of one victim, Fabio Talas, has become famous across Italy for his role in uncovering the sect.
We have suffered. We have sunk into the abyss, into the depths of hell.
In Italy, no one can quite believe how a group of ordinary kids have sunk to such depths.
These are normal families. These are normal families. So this thing could happen to anybody.
And some people believe that it was the death metal music that drew these children into the world of Satanism. Infliction are a well-known band on the Milan death metal scene. Like many bands, they got together when they were teenagers. Fabio Talas was one of their early members.
Fabio l'aveva contratto nel 96.
We met Fabio in 96 through our former bass player.
Tramite il nostro vecchio bassista.
Ciao Fabio, tutto bene?
He seemed to be the right kind of person for us. So we said, hey, come and gig with us.
Dai, vieni a provare con noi.
14-year-old Fabio soon became the lead singer of Infliction, as well as the bass player. And like most parents, Fabio's father, Michele, wasn't sure quite how to react.
Francamente, fino ad allora per me era solo
To be honest, it was just noise to me. I wouldn't let them practice here at home, so they used to practice in the garage or in the basement.
Però francamente erano bravi.
Anyway, I have to say that they were good.
Nel loro piccolo, nell'alto.
In their crowd, some of the young girls got really worked up about them, shouting, Fabio.
Urlavano Fabio.
But Fabio had another life that his parents did not know so much about. This increasingly involved staying out late and drinking with friends.
13-14 anni.
At 13 or 14, he was still a child and stayed at home in the evenings.
Poi dopo, avendo intrapreso questa attività,
After he started with his music, we were more or less obliged to let him have a bit more freedom.
senza allora cosa
He started going out on Saturdays to his usual places, like the Midnight Pub.
frequentazione di questo pub Midnight.
The Midnight Pub is the center of the metal scene in Milan. At the Midnight, Fabio was meeting a new group of friends outside his band Infliction. These were people that his parents didn't know so well, many of them older than Fabio. Through them, Fabio became involved in another band. He set up Ferocity with a boy called Mario Macchione.
We said let's form a band in the style of Deicide, the American death metal band. He went for it at once.
E lui c'è stato, al volo.
The idea behind playing this type of music was to pump up the adrenaline, to cross boundaries and go beyond the limits.
Like their idols Deicide, and unknown to their parents, the boys began experimenting with the occult.
Fabio was very attracted to the idea of Satanism, which the metal music was about. He was fascinated by these things.
Then, on Saturday, the 17th of January, 1998, Fabio went to the Midnight Bar as usual. He was 16 years old. And for the first time, he phoned home saying he wanted to stay out for the night with a girl he knew called Chiara Marino. His father was having none of it.
I said, look, get the subway home the same time as usual, no fooling around. Okay, Dad, I understand.
Va bene, va.
Worried by the tone of Fabio's voice, Michele drove into Milan to get his son.
Of course, when I got there, they weren't there. Someone said, yes, he was here with Chiara. They went to make a phone call. They're not back yet.
When Fabio and Chiara did not come home the next day, their parents immediately called the police. Over the following days, they contacted everyone who knew them. The police said that Fabio and Chiara had probably run off together. But to Fabio's family, this made no sense. He was happy at home and doing well at school. So as the days turned into weeks, with no sign of his son, Michele began to investigate Fabio's other life. Michele Tallis was to find out that his son's addiction to death metal music had gone way beyond playing the guitar and deep into the world of the occult. Michele Tallis is a construction worker. Like many parents, he took little notice of the music his children listened to. But when his son, a death metal fan, went missing, he decided to investigate a little further.
così, qui c'è il suo angolo.
This is Fabio's little corner. Lots of cassettes. About 150 or 200 of them, plus about 50 CDs.
CD musicali e di cui comincio a
I started picking up these cassettes, and I got my niece to help me translate some.
da mia figlia e così
Some of the lyrics and the titles on the covers are mind-blowing. Here, for example, they're talking about hacking people to pieces.
Quest'altro qui sono i Deicide, letteralmente genocidio.
This other one, by Deicide, literally genocide of the gods. It was one of Fabio's favorite groups.
The Florida-based band Deicide was one of the pioneers of death metal in the late 1980s. The new genre pushed traditional heavy metal to new extremes, with lyrics about demons, sexual violence, mutilation, and necrophilia.
The term heavy metal, you know, describe bands like Black Sabbath and, you know, Zeppelin and stuff like that. And for me, you know, growing up, we wanted to outdo that stuff, you know, be heavier than that. And that was what, you know, there was no such thing as death metal when we started writing this stuff.
Benton's band Deicide has made hundreds of thousands of dollars selling albums and touring the world. His songs are highly blasphemous attacks on Christianity. Benton says he's a Satanist, a set of beliefs that comes from his family background.
Growing up, if you didn't believe in God, you were like an outcast. And my grandmother was from Sicily. She was very into the Catholic religion. And a lot of the titles to a lot of my songs were, you know, in conversations with my grandmother about religion and debates. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. My dad was Catholic. My mother was Lutheran. I mean, it was an interesting childhood, you know.
So what do today's kids make of all this? Death metal fans are a fanatical bunch. They revel in the notoriety of musicians like Benton.
Deicide, they're brutal and they're freaks. Of course, Glenn Benton is a freak, I'd say so, but this is kind of positive for me. I can say he's an artist, and this is what I like about him.
Research carried out by a Stanford University professor highlights the dedicated nature of heavy metal fans.
They spend more time listening to music. They spend more of their money on music. They buy more albums. They go to many more concerts than, say, the pop fan or the rock fan. They really are into the music. They are also much more likely to nominate a heavy metal performer as a role model than kids who are into other kinds of music.
And the death metal musicians themselves recognize the kind of kids who follow them.
These kids that feel, I think, alienated from society at large, like most teenagers do when they're growing up, to have something that they feel like they belong to.
You know, like when I was growing up, you know, I would purposely play songs, you know, I'd turn my stereo on in my room and listen to particular, you know, songs that would upset my parents.
Children of the underworld!
For most parents, this is an incomprehensible world. They tend to let their kids get on with it and don't pry too deeply. But when Fabio Tallis disappeared in Milan in 1998, his father Michele decided to find out about the scene his son had been involved with. So he began a search that was to take him to heavy metal concerts across Europe.
I went to see them all, from the very small groups whose names I found among Fabio's papers to the larger, more famous groups. For example, I went to see Slayer. I saw Mayhem and Pantera. I went to see Iron Maiden, Deicide. I spoke to Glenn Benton with the help of a young man who interpreted for me. I explained what I was doing and who I was looking for, that my son was a great fan of his and so on.
I think I met the father backstage at one of the shows. But his kid was missing or something like that. I think I remember telling him that I hope he comes back, and he's probably just off with his buddies. I don't think he spoke a lick of English, and there was somebody interpreting for him.
And he signed the magazine I had in my hand, which had his photograph in it. He said to me, when Fabio returns home, you can show him this.
Michele handed out leaflets and placed articles in metal magazines. As his search went on, Michele began to learn more about the people his son had been hanging around with. He became suspicious that they weren't telling him all they knew.
Fabio spent all his free time with these people. And you can understand how I became more and more convinced that they had to know something at least.
So Michele began to dig a little deeper. He began to talk to other people in the Milan metal scene. It emerged that this group was bound together by more than just music. They were involved with the occult. The parents of Chiara Marino, the girl who had disappeared with Fabio, discovered satanic literature and icons in their daughter's room. Slowly, Michele built up a dossier of information, names, addresses, and photographs of Fabio's friends. Over the next 6 years, he became convinced that his son's disappearance was connected to a satanic sect. Then, on the 25th of January 2004, police were called to a house in a village outside Milan. What they found was to shock even the most hardened detectives. What began in January 2004 as a routine police inquiry was to become one of Italy's most sensational murder cases.
We started with the interior of the house. The lights were still on.
Dopodiché troviamo il tavolo completamente apparecchiato.
The table was still laid with 2 plates untouched and 3 glasses of sparkling wine half drunk.
Contenenti dello spumante. Capivamo che era successo qualcosa.
Something strange had happened here.
E all'interno della serra.
In the greenhouse, we saw hands jutting out of the earth and some tufts of hair.
Che escono dalla terra, delle ciocche di capelli.
The police discovered the half-buried body of a local girl called Mariangela Pizzata. An autopsy revealed she had been shot, then buried while still alive. Details of the murder made the local news.
I heard the news that a girl from Somma Lombardo had been murdered. It wasn't so much the news item itself as the name Andrea Volpe.
Andrea Volpe had played in a death metal band with Fabio. Convinced there was a connection with his son's disappearance, Michele gathered up all the information he had collected about Fabio's friends and handed it to the police. Using this dossier, the police mounted a surveillance operation on Fabio's friends and tapped their phones. And they began to interrogate Volpe about Satanism and about the disappearance of Fabio and Chiara.
We put pressure on Volpe, suggesting to him that we knew about the other crimes he had committed. Maybe it was this pressure that caused him to break, but he told us that we were effectively right. The 2 kids had been killed during a satanic ritual, and their bodies had been buried in a wood in Somma Lombardo, and he could show us where they were.
For 15 days, police and forensic teams scoured the area as Volpe tried to remember where the bodies were hidden. Finally, in March 2004, more than 6 years after they disappeared, the bodies of Fabio Tallis and Chiara Marino were found.
It was a bombshell.
Apocalisse.
The end of the world.
After 6 years, Michele Tallis was finally able to bury his son. Police began to round up Fabio's friends, and Andrea Volpe began to reveal details of a strange satanic cult. This had gone way beyond listening to death metal music.
Volpe's revelations were quite chilling. The first thing he said was that this sect existed and that it was called the Beasts of Satan. He described incredible, disturbing facts. They would meet in wooded areas or in abandoned factories. They would draw the pentacle, the five-pointed star. The leaders of the sect would each stand on a point of the star. They would have a picture of the person to be cursed. They would drip blood onto it, and then they would invoke the devil and curse that person.
Other members of the Beasts of Satan sect also began to talk to the police. Fabio's friend Mario had been the group's spiritual link to the forces of darkness.
We believed we were in contact with demons, and we submitted to those demons, which was a completely crazy thing to do. We lived in our own world, which had nothing to do with the outside world.
Catholic Italy has been deeply shocked at how a group of normal-looking kids could have gotten caught up in such disturbing satanic violence. But the Beasts of Satan were not the first teenage death metal fanatics to get involved in occult rituals. The case bore strange similarities to a murder that shocked an American town. In 1996, 2 years before Italian teenager Fabio Tallis went missing, serious questions had emerged about the possible effects of death metal music on the behavior of young people. A California police officer was investigating the background of 3 teenage boys.
You hear a lot about this ritualistic, satanic influence, and I always have taken these things with a grain of salt. But it's pretty hard to deny that these kids, they wanted to mimic the lyrics.
Jacob DeLashmet, Royce Casey, and Joe Fiorella were students at Arroyo Grande High School in 1995. Joe was the youngest at just 15. The 3 boys were obsessed with death metal, and they appeared to take its satanic message literally.
According to Casey, they had planned what he referred to as a perfect sacrifice to the devil, which he described as being a blonde-haired, blue-eyed virgin.
The girl they selected for the sacrifice was 15-year-old Elise Marie Paler, who went to the same high school. One evening, she agreed to meet the boys.
Elise left her home here and walked up to the fence where they were waiting for her. They indicated that they had some marijuana and that they would all just sit around and talk and smoke a little marijuana and just have a little get-together. By the time that they got up to Chamisil, it was beginning to be dark. Well, Elise and Joe, Casey, and Jacob, as they came up from Chamisil Lane, then they walked along the fence line here. As they got to this area here,
that's sort of free of the vegetation and talked for another 10 or 15 minutes. Jacob stood behind Elise, wrapped the belt around her neck, and began choking her. And at this time, Joe Fiorello pulled out a fixed-bladed knife and began stabbing her in the neck. According to Royce, Elise was begging for her life, asking God to help her, and calling out for her mom.
Elise's body was found 8 months later after one of the boys, Royce Casey, led the police to where her body lay. Casey claimed that Elise had been killed in a satanic ritual inspired by death metal music.
This is their band Hatred. This is the T is an upside-down cross, the Antichrist symbol. In each of their rooms, they had satanic symbols, pentagrams. Royce said that when they listened to this music day in and day out, that he said he began to get into the occult, into the satanic. I know that we found a lot of Slayer lyrics there in Delashman's home.
Slayer are one of the most successful of all death metal bands, having sold millions of CDs worldwide. Their songs deal with Satanism, torture, murder, and rape.
And the lyrics are clearly any horrific thing that you could do against a woman to victimize them and subdue them. And the music lyrics are almost like laughing at how we can torture a woman and get away with it.
Elise Paler's parents believed that their daughter's murderers had mimicked Slayer's lyrics. Slayer declined to be interviewed for this program. They have always denied the music had anything to do with the killing. This controversy has raged for years. From Ozzy Osbourne to Judas Priest, metal bands have been accused of inciting teenagers to violence. Ever since the advent of rock and roll, parents have worried that music could turn well-adjusted young people into delinquents. But research suggests that these concerns may be missing the point.
There are probably 10 million teenagers in the United States listening to heavy metal, and most of them are just fine. The concern is if you come at it the other way. There are kids who are problematic for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with the music. They're alienated from their families, they're alienated from school, they're experiencing depression, possibly all of these things, and now suddenly they are listening to the kind of music, the sound of which and the lyrics of which are violent, the lyrics are misogynist, the lyrics are depressed and depressing, the lyrics are satanic, they talk about suicide, they talk about self-mutilation, the very kinds of things we're worried that these problem kids will get engaged in. What the music may well be doing is simply reinforcing beliefs that they might have started with in the first place.
Elise Paler's parents were convinced that their daughter's killers had been influenced by the lyrics of death metal band Slayer, and they were prepared to go to court to try and prove it. Police investigating the murder of 15-year-old Elise Paler in California believe that her killers had been influenced by the satanic lyrics of one of the world's most successful death metal acts, Slayer. Elise's parents felt the band should share some of the blame for their daughter's death.
We put together a team of attorneys to go after Slayer and the entire music industry. We're talking Sony Records, we're talking about Columbia Records, we're talking about everybody and anybody that had anything to do with the marketing and sale of this type of death metal music lyrics to children.
From 1985, Record companies like Slayer's have voluntarily attached parental advisory stickers to music with explicit content. The Palers argued that parental advisory was not enough. It should be illegal to sell violent music to children.
So we filed the lawsuit, and we didn't say they can't make the music, because that's their right. They can make this music. We just don't want you targeting and marketing to children. And it was unfortunately stopped at a fairly early stage before we were allowed to conduct further discovery and learn more about their marketing methodology and more about their audience.
Slayer and their record companies won the case by arguing their First Amendment right to free speech. The judge found the music was not directly harmful to minors. Slayer's management says that 70% of the band's audience is over 21, and they deny that they deliberately target children.
The things they said, a normal, intelligent, logical person would be shocked about how they could justify this. And then I kept thinking when I was listening to them, don't they have children at home? Don't they have families? And how do they sleep at night?
So the voluntary parental advisory sticker is all that remains to regulate violent music lyrics. This suits the death metal musicians.
You don't want your kids listening to it, and they don't want, put the stickers on it. I never had a problem with it. I suggested it. I said, slap a parental. That only sells records for me. See, they don't get it. See, if you put a sticker on it saying, stay away, what are they going to do? They're going to go to it.
We're going to do a song now that I think you all know. About blood and Satan and war, called Carnage!
Norwegian band Mayhem are probably the most controversial metal band of all. They too have been blamed for corrupting young people. Norwegian black metal is an even darker genre than death metal. One of Mayhem's early singers, named Dead, blew his brains out with a shotgun. Another Mayhem recruit was equally disastrous. Varg Vikernes, also known as Count Grisnocht, played bass in the band. His career was cut short after he murdered the band's lead guitarist in a frenzied knife attack. The killings made Mayhem notorious across Norway, and the legend of black metal was born. But it wasn't just murder that fueled the black metal phenomenon. The lyrics are violently anti-Christian, and some of the musicians decided to practice what they preached. In 1992, they began to set fire to churches. Many were arrested, but their fans joined in the fun. In the space of 5 years, more than 40 churches, including some of the country's most historic, were torched by young black metal fans. It was the most extraordinary outbreak of copycat crime in the history of music. And sleepy Norway was shocked. Black metal became every parent's nightmare. But in Norway, just like everywhere else, boys fall in love with playing the guitar, fast and furious. Adrian is 13 and has already been playing the electric guitar for 2 years. Norwegian parents have had to think hard about how to deal with it.
He started with the upside-down cross, and he had the pentagram, and he had those needles, spikes. And he wanted black clothes, only black.
It was a big change in his life.
Like many young metal fans, Adrian plays in his own band. He's the lead singer and writes some of the lyrics.
We called Tearing Carnage. It's death metal, you know, like cutting people or sort like that. But it's black death metal.
When I read those things, I thought it was terrible, and it is terrible. What he's writing is the pictures that he draws is terrible, but it is so far from reality, very far from reality.
You don't take this seriously?
No, it's all fantasy. No, it's just like a movie. It's like living in a fantasy.
I think it is very important to not to just deny it or say that you're not supposed to do that and this, but to find out what it is, how this is, what is he thinking, and why is he fascinated? What is it with this music?
Not all parents are so relaxed about extreme metal music. In Italy, Michele Tallis was convinced that the music was connected to his son's murder, and further shocking revelations were to emerge from the Beasts of Satan trial. In Italy, Michele Tallis' son was drawn to death metal, and ultimately to his death. The Beasts of Satan case has been one of the most sensational trials in recent times. 8 years after his son's death, Michele Tallis has come to the end of his search for justice. Many of the suspicions he held while his son was missing have been proved right. The people with Fabio on the night he died had been the boys from his death metal band Ferocity, Nicola Sapone, Andrea Volpe, and his boyhood friend, Mario Macchione.
The plan that evening was to go and carry out another of our usual tests of courage, but intended metaphorically, like something which involved a sacrifice to the devil. You had to risk your life. We drank a bit, we smoked a bit, then left the midnight. On the journey, we listened to Deicide, I think. When we reached the village where the woods are in Somma Lombardo, these drugs confuse you. They distort your memory. I have absolutely no memory of how things went.
Mario Macchione has changed his story of what happened that night several times. From other testimony and evidence, police believe they have pieced together what really happened.
Nicola Sapone held Chiara Marino from behind, stabbing her in the stomach. At the same time, Volpe began stabbing Fabio Tallis. And Mario Macchione hit him with a hammer on the top of his skull. The two kids were then thrown into the hole.
I remember I got up from the ground as though I'd fallen, covered in blood. I had the hammer there near me.
It seems that Nicola Sapone then got into the hole and slit their throats. And because they were still moaning, he stuffed some chestnut husks in their mouths. Then they filled in the hole and urinated on the grave.
I still didn't believe it had all happened.
Mario Macchione is serving 19 years for the murders of Fabio and Chiara. Andrea Volpe received a 30-year sentence.
I don't have any feelings of revenge, bitterness, or hatred. My greatest satisfaction, although I say that in inverted commas, because nothing will bring Fabio back to us. Nothing could take us back 8 years. My satisfaction lies in knowing that we've stopped them. Stopped them.
In January 2006, 5 more members of the sect, pictured here, were found guilty of the Beasts of Satan murders and given long jail sentences. Finally, the motives behind the crime are emerging. Chiara was murdered as a ritual sacrifice to the devil. Fabio had to die for the simple reason that he had become skeptical and begun to mock the other members of the group for their satanic beliefs. But the murders were not the only crimes to be linked to the Beasts of Satan. Andrea Bontade was a drummer in another metal band. He failed to turn up on the night of Fabio's murder, and Andrea Volpe confessed to using psychological terror to pressure him into committing suicide. And there have been other mysterious deaths. A cemetery worker who set his own car on fire. A boy who hung himself in the woods. 7 young men with apparent links to the Beasts of Satan have either disappeared or committed suicide. And amid the outcry surrounding the case, many have questioned the role of death metal music in what has happened.
You can count on the fingers of one hand the people who have done what we have done. Of the millions of people who listen to metal, no one, I repeat, no one has ever been involved in anything like this. In fact, many more people have done things like this who haven't listened to metal at all.
No one can contradict me when I say that heavy metal and Satanism are closely linked. They go hand in hand. They're inseparable, without a shadow of a doubt.
My kid listens to this music. He has no desire to go out and rob anybody or kill anybody, okay? I say don't blame people like me, Manson, and people, you know, that do what we do. Because we never, come on, we never, you know, said, hey, we're going to be role models for your kids. That ain't what this is about. It's about entertainment.
It's all about the metal, man. That's all it's about.